Chapter 5. Kiva. When he met Ash the next day, Leamas smelt of whisky. But Ash was very happy to see him and gave him an envelope of cash, 20 £1 notes. "Thanks," said Leamas, who had not shaved and was wearing a dirty shirt. He called the waiter and ordered drinks. When the drinks arrived, Leamas's hand shook as he poured some water into his whisky. Ash talked a lot about himself while they had lunch. He told Leamas about a friend called Sam Kiva, who paid him and other people to write articles about the United Kingdom for foreign newspapers. Leamas just let Ash talk while he drank a lot. He did not talk about himself, and he did not ask any questions. "You don't know Sam, do you?" asked Ash at last. "Who's Sam?" asked Leamas, looking confused. Ash sounded quite cross when he replied. Sam Kiva, the man I was telling you about," he said. "Maybe you've met him." "I don't think so." There was a pause. "What do you do these days? What job, I mean?" asked Ash. Leamas shrugged. "Nothing much," he replied. "What was it that you did in Berlin?" asked Ash. "Weren't you one of those Cold War people?" Leamas was surprised at the direct question. Ash must want to recruit me quickly, he thought. "I was just doing things for the Americans," he answered, pretending to be angry. "That's what we all did." "You know," said Ash, "I've been thinking that you ought to meet Sam. You'd like him. Where do you live? Tell me, and then I can get in touch with you and bring Sam." "I don't live anywhere," said Leamas. "I haven't got a job or any money. I just sleep where I can. The company that I worked for behaved badly to me." Ash looked upset. "You must come and stay with me," he said. "I can't do that," replied Leamas. "I'll be all right. I'll get a job. I've had jobs before." And then he continued, still sounding angry. "I had jobs after they got rid of me. I worked in a horrible factory. I sold encyclopedias. I got bored in a library." "Leamas, you need a better job," replied Ash. "You worked in Berlin for years, so you must speak German well. There are lots of things you could do. But you need to know useful people, don't you see?" Ash sounded almost happy now. "Come and stay with me. Where are your things?" "I haven't got any," said Leamas. "Everything I had was in the parcel, and I left that in this cafe." Ash lived in a small flat in Dolphin Square. There was not much furniture, and there were a few pictures from Germany. It was what Leamas had expected. Ash made some tea, and then he said that he had to go out and do some shopping. "Why don't you get some sleep, Alec?" he said to Leamas. "You look really tired." Then he touched Leamas gently on his shoulder and went out. A few minutes later, Leamas went out too, carefully leaving the door unlocked. He went to one of the public telephones on the ground floor and rang a number. "I'm ringing about Mr. Sam Kiva," Leamas said to the voice that answered the phone. "He is coming to a meeting this evening at this address." Then he gave the voice the address in Dolphin Square. "I'll give the information to Control," said the voice. Leamas was woken up by Ash returning. With him was a small, fat man with grey hair who was wearing an expensive suit. He sounded like a foreigner. Perhaps he was German. Leamas was not sure. He said that his name was Sam Keever. They went to eat at a Chinese restaurant. The food was good, and so was the wine, and Ash paid the bill. Then they went to a bar, and Ash continued to buy Leamas drinks. Leamas was drinking whiskey now. Keever seemed a bit bored. Then Leamas leaned across the table and said to Ash, "Now tell me what is going on." "What do you mean, Alec?" Ash sounded surprised. "I mean that you followed me from prison yesterday," Leamas said quietly. "You've told me a stupid story about meeting me in Berlin. You've given me money that you didn't owe me. You've bought me expensive meals, and now I'm staying at your flat. I'm asking, why?" There was silence, and then Keever spoke. "You go home," he said to Ash. "I'll talk to Mr. Leamas." After Ash had gone, Leamas leaned forward across the table again and said, "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" Keever nodded. "Of course. I told Ash to contact you." "Why?" "I'm interested in you. I want to make a suggestion to you. I have a company that asks people to write interesting articles for my customers abroad. You've got memories of your international experience that one of my customers will pay for. They pay quickly, and then they ask for more information. They are happy to pay money into foreign banks." Leamas said nothing. "Why is the other side hurrying?" he thought. Then he answered his own question in his head. "I'm a man with no money who has just come out of prison, and I'm angry with the Secret Service that I worked for. A man like me would want to be paid by the other side for his knowledge." "They'd have to pay me a lot for my knowledge," he said quietly. "My customer is offering a first payment of £15,000, said Keever. "My customer wants to talk to you now, and you can have the money as soon as you have talked to him. You will receive another £5,000 if you give my customer more information during the next year, and you will get help to move to any country in the world." "How soon do you want an answer?" asked Leamas. "Now," said Keever. "You will meet my customer tomorrow and talk to him. Then he will arrange for someone to write down your memories." "Where would I meet your customer?" asked Leamas. "It would be simpler to meet outside the United Kingdom," replied Keever. "My customer has suggested a meeting in Holland." "I haven't got a passport," said Leamas. "I have a passport for you," said Keever calmly. "We're flying to The Hague tomorrow morning at 9:45. Shall we go to my flat?" Keever's flat was in an expensive part of London. He didn't want to talk, and Leamas realized that he was nervous. They were both nervous. Keever took Leamas to a bedroom, and the next morning he was woken by Keever at 6 a.m. "I haven't got any luggage," said Leamas. "I've organized your luggage and a British passport," replied Keever. The passport had his name and details and a photograph. Leamas looked at the date on it. "This passport runs out very soon," he said to Kiva.
"My customer doesn't want you to be able to go to other places easily," replied Kiva, laughing.
As Kiva answered, Leamas felt nervous again. His life would never be the same after today.
"You won't need any money," Kiva said. "The customer is paying for everything."
Chapter 6. The House by the Sea. After the plane landed in The Hague, Kiva and Leamas went quickly through the airport.
"Have a nice stay in Holland,"
said the Dutch passport officer. As they walked through the airport to the exit, Leamas looked back. He saw a man with glasses standing reading an English newspaper. He was small, and he looked worried. Leamas and Kiva got into a car in the car park. The driver never spoke as she drove them out of The Hague. Leamas had been there during the war, and he guessed that they were travelling towards the coast. After a short time, the car stopped at a small house by the sea, and a friendly woman opened the door and let them in. Leamas saw a man in a raincoat getting out of another car.
"Welcome," the woman said. "Did you have a good journey?"
"Yes," replied Kiva. "It was a very good flight."
"That's good,"
she replied, and she disappeared. During Leamas's stay in the house, she brought meals to them, usually bread and cold meat. Then Kiva opened the front door, and the man in the raincoat came in. He was the same height as Leamas, but older. He shook Leamas's hand.
"My name is Peters," he said. "Did you have a good flight?" "Yes," replied Kiva quickly. "Mr. Leamas and I have a lot to discuss," said Peters to Kiva. "You can leave now."
Kiva smiled.
"Goodbye, and good luck,"
he said to Leamas, and held out his hand. Leamas nodded, but did not shake his hand. Kiva left the house quietly. Peters went into a room at the back of the house, and Leamas followed him.
"Listen,"
said Leamas, suddenly sounding very nervous.
"We both know why we're here. I'm a defector, and you're going to pay me for information. You don't all have to pretend that you like me and want to be nice to me."
"Kiva told me that you were a proud man," replied Peters, sitting down at a table.
He spoke English very well. Leamas guessed that he was Russian, but he was not sure. He sat down too.
"Kiva told you what we are going to pay you, didn't he?"
asked Peters.
"He said that you would pay me £15,000 now," replied Leamas, "and he said that you would pay me another £5,000 if I talked to you during the next year."
"Yes, that's right,"
replied Peters. "I won't accept the £5,000, and I won't talk to you during the next year," said Leamas. "You know that I can't do that. I want to take the £15,000 and get away. If I tell you everything I know, I will have to disappear. The British Secret Service will know what I've done and look for me immediately."
Peters nodded, and then he said,
"But you could come somewhere safer with us, couldn't you?"
"Are you asking me to come behind the Iron Curtain?" asked Leamas.
Peters nodded again. "I don't want to do that," Leamas said very quickly. Peters nodded, then said, "Shall we start?" During the morning of the first day, Peters asked questions about what Leamas had done during the war. Leamas told him about being in the army and then getting a number of different jobs because he spoke Dutch, German, and French. Leamas had learned the languages when he lived in Holland because his father had an engineering factory there. The British Secret Service had trained him, and he had worked with spies in Holland and Norway during the war. After the war, he had gone to Berlin. Peters saw that Leamas was sweating. He saw a man who wanted to betray his country, but was upset and uncomfortable. This was what Leamas wanted him to see. Leamas watched Peters, too, and decided that he was good at his job. Peters listened carefully, only asking a few questions. Leamas told Peters about starting to work in Berlin in the 1950s. The British needed to get information from East Germany, but it was hard to find good agents. At last, in 1959, Carl Riemek made contact with him, first by leaving photographs and documents in Leamas's car. Then they had met. Riemek worked for the Presidium of the East German government. He did not have a very important job, but he gave Leamas enormous amounts of useful information about Presidium meetings. He also gave Leamas the names and jobs of people in the East German Secret Service. "Did Riemek give you all the information you're telling me about?" Peters asked. "Yes, of course," replied Leamas. "I see," said Peters. "Please, go on." Peters filled Leamas's glass with more whiskey, as he had done often during the interrogation, and Leamas continued. Bit by bit, he told Peters all about Riemek's work. He gave the names of other agents who Riemek had introduced to Leamas, and the dates they had started being agents. He explained what the circus had thought and how much they had paid Riemek. Peters was pleased at how good Leamas's memory was, even though he was drinking so much. "I don't believe you," said Peters after a while. "Riemek's job wasn't important enough. He couldn't do all this on his own." "He did do it," said Leamas, suddenly becoming angry. "Didn't the circus wonder whether there was another person helping him?" asked Peters. "No," replied Leamas. "Oh, that's interesting," said Peters thoughtfully. Then, after a moment, he said, "You heard about Riemek's woman, didn't you?" "What about her?" asked Leamas. "She was murdered a week ago. She was shot as she left the flat in West Berlin." Leamas was very surprised. She was in West Berlin. Why wasn't she safe there? He thought. Did Riemek tell her the name of another East German agent? And did that agent arrange for someone to kill her so she didn't tell anyone the name? That night, Leamas continued to think about the woman's death. Why didn't Control tell me about it? He wondered. He remembered his question to Control about why they should get rid of Munt, and Control's answer. He had asked, "Why? We've got no one left in Germany to protect. You just said so yourself. Riemek was the last one." And Control had replied, "That isn't quite true, but I don't think I need to tell you about it." What did Control know that he didn't tell me? Leamas thought. And why didn't he tell me? That night, he thought about the murdered woman, and then he thought about Liz. Chapter 7. Bad News. Peters arrived at the house at 8 a.m. the next morning, and immediately started the interrogation again. He asked Leamas about his time in London since leaving Berlin. Leamas told him the story that he had agreed with Control. He told him about working in the office at the circus that made payments to people working abroad. He explained that he was bored, that he had started to drink, and that he had been asked to leave. Peters was interested in his last job at the circus. "Tell me what you did," he said. "I made payments to agents," replied Leamas. "I got letters telling me to write checks, but I never had the names of the agents or where they were in the world. But sometimes they gave me too much information, so I did know who was going to be paid. I made a list last night of all the payments that I could remember." Leamas gave Peters his list, and Peters read it carefully. "This is good," he said. "Very good." Leamas continued. "I remember an operation called Rolling Stone best," he said. "I made 2 trips abroad because I was working on it. One trip was to Denmark, to Copenhagen, and one was to Finland, to Helsinki. I had to deposit money in banks." "How much money?" $10,000 in Copenhagen and $40,000 in Helsinki," replied Leamas. "Who was the money for?" asked Peters. "I don't know," replied Leamas. "Control didn't tell me." "Was Control managing the operation himself?" asked Peters. "Yes," said Leamas. "I had some information, but not all of it." He gave a lot more information about Rolling Stone to Peters. He explained that the circus gave him false documents for the person who would get the money from the Danish and Finnish banks. He told Peters that some payments were made before he was working in the office. Peters wrote everything down carefully. "What were the names the person had to use to withdraw the money from the banks?" he asked. "Horst Karlsdorf and Adolf Fechtman," said Leamas. "Those are both German names," said Peters. "Yes, but the person wasn't German," replied Leamas quickly. "Why are you sure about that?" asked Peters. "Because I was head of operations in Berlin. I would have known if we were paying large amounts of money to an East German agent," said Leamas, beginning to sound angry. "Are you sure there wasn't another agent for the British working in East Germany?" asked Peters. "I'm sure there wasn't," shouted Leamas, now very angry. He remembered what Control had said. "Give them your information, and let them work out what to think. It will be good to make them think that they know more than you." Peters nodded, as if he understood something about Leamas. He thought that Leamas was angry that the circus might have an agent in East Germany who Leamas did not know about. "You are a very proud man, Mr. Leamas," he said. Peters left the house at lunchtime on the second day. He did not appear that afternoon, and he did not appear the next morning either. Leamas asked the woman who brought his meals where Peters was, but she just smiled and shrugged. At last he decided to go for a walk by the sea. There was a girl on the beach throwing pieces of bread to the seabirds.
Leamas thought about Liz. He wanted to do simple things with her, like throw bread to seabirds. He wanted love, and to have a new life with her. He would be home soon, perhaps in 2 weeks. He would have plenty of money, and he could come in from the cold. When he got back to the house, he heard the woman make a phone call. Finally, at 3 p.m., Peters arrived, and as soon as Leamas saw him, he knew that there was a problem. Peters did not take off his coat and did not sit down. "I've got bad news for you," said Peters. "I heard it this morning. The police are searching for you in England. They're checking ships and planes that are leaving the country." "Why do they want me?" thought Leamas. He was shocked and confused, but he stayed silent. "There are articles in all the newspapers, but they just say that police want to talk to you. They don't say that you have defected, but they mention the Official Secrets Act, so people will think that you are a spy." This wasn't part of the plan. "I'm supposed to be able to go home in 2 weeks," he thought. "Why has Control done this?" Leamas felt angry with Control and worried, but he tried to think quickly. "What am I going to do?" he asked himself. "I could refuse to talk any more to Peters, but if I stop acting my part now, the operation against Munt will fail. Every police force in Western Europe will be looking for you," said Peters. "You've got a choice. You can let us look after you, we can arrange to take you to the East, or you can go away alone. But you will definitely be caught. You don't have any money, your passport runs out in 10 days, and you don't have any false documents." "If I come with you, what will you do with me when you have completed your interrogation?" asked Leamas. Peters shrugged. "We'll give you a new passport, probably. Then you can go where you want." Leamas stared out of the window. At last he said, "All right, I'll come." "There is no plane to the East until tomorrow," said Peters. "But there is a flight to Berlin in an hour. We need to leave now." At the airport, Leamas bought a newspaper. He found an article about himself, and he wondered whether Liz had seen it. Chapter 8. Alec's Friend. Liz was very sad after Alec disappeared. Of course, she heard about him hitting the grocer and going to prison. The members of her Communist Party branch talked about it at a meeting, though they did not know about her and Alec. "He knew he was going to do it," she thought. "He knew it when he said goodbye to me. But why?" Once she went to his flat and talked to his landlord. She did not know why she did it, but the landlord spoke kindly about Alec, so she was pleased she had gone. He told her that a friend of Mr. Leamas, a small, shy man with glasses, had come to see him. The friend said that Mr. Leamas had asked him to pay all his rent. Mr. Leamas was a strange man, the landlord said, but it was very good of him to send his friend to do that. She continued to work at the library, and thought about Alec all the time. Then a man came to see her at her flat. He was a short man who wore glasses and an expensive suit. She thought he must be Alec's friend. The man said that he came from the police, from Special Branch. Then he asked her about Alec. "I believe you were friendly with Alec Leamas," he said worriedly. He looked kind, and Liz trusted him without knowing why. So she answered him honestly. "Yes," she said. "How did you know?" "Oh, we found out by chance," he replied. "When you go to prison, you have to give the names of your family or the people closest to you. Then they can be informed if anything happens to you. And Alec gave your name." "I see." Liz was surprised and confused. "Did anyone know that you were friendly with Alec?" the small man went on. "No." "Did you go to the trial after he hit the grocer?" "No." "Did any people from the newspapers call you?" he asked. "No, I've told you," said Liz. "No one knew, not even my parents." The small man thought for a moment, then asked, "Were you surprised when Alec hit the grocer?" Liz wondered if she was talking too much to him, but she wanted to talk to someone about it. It did not matter now. "Yes, I was surprised," she said, "but I think he knew that he was going to do it." "What do you mean?" the man asked quickly. "Well, the night before he did it, we had supper together," she replied. "It was a special meal, and I asked him, 'Is this goodbye?'" "What did he say?" said the small man. "He said that he had something that he must do. I didn't really understand," Liz said. There was a very long silence, and the small man looked more worried than ever. Liz suddenly felt terrified for Alec, and she did not know why. "Why do you think he asked people to inform you if anything happened to him?" the man asked. Liz felt her face turn red. "I was in love with him," she replied. "Please, don't ask any more questions. Please go now." The small man got up to go, then took out a card from his pocket and put it gently on the table. "If you ever want any help or if anything happens about Alec, ring me," he said. "Do you understand?" "Who are you?" asked Liz. "I'm Alec's friend," he replied. "Oh, just one more question. Did Alec know that you are a member of the Communist Party?" "Yes, I told him," she replied. "Does the party know about you and Alec?" he asked. "No, I told you," she shouted. "No one knew." Then suddenly she cried out, "Where is he? Tell me where he is. I can help him. I can look after him." "He's abroad," replied the small man quietly. "I'm sorry that he told you that he had something special to do." "Who are you?" she asked again. "I'm Alec's friend," he repeated. "Don't worry, we'll look after you, with money and that kind of thing." He went out of the door, and she heard a car start in the street. Then she remembered the card and picked it up off the table. There was only a name, address, and telephone number on it. There was nothing to say what his job was. Mr. George Smiley, 9 Bywater Street, Chelsea. It was very strange. Chapter 9. To the East. Leamas sat on the plane to West Berlin and wondered again why things had changed. Why had his defection been discovered so soon? Control knew, because Control had done this, but Leamas did not know. He also remembered Control's advice when he had stayed at his house for the weekend. Get angry. Drink a lot. Confuse them by telling them that something is true one day, then telling them that the same thing is not true the next day. Make them work hard to get your information. Make them believe they have worked out that Munt has betrayed their side to us. They already have information that we gave them before you became involved. You are taking them the last parts of the story. After the plane landed, Peters led Leamas quickly through the airport to a big black car which was waiting in a car park. After they got into it, a smaller car pulled out of the same car park in front of them. Both cars moved quickly through the streets of Berlin, and Leamas was surprised at how easily they crossed out of the west and into the east. Leamas thought that they would stop in East Berlin, but the car kept moving. "Where are we going?" he asked Peters. "We're here," replied Peters. "We are in the German Democratic Republic." "I thought we would go further east, to Russia," said Leamas. "The East Germans want to talk to you," said Peters. Leamas nodded his head, and Peters continued, "I sent your information to them, and they are interested in it. They've never talked to anyone with your knowledge before." "Who will interrogate me?" asked Leamas. "I know the names of most of the people in the East German Secret Service." "Who do you think that you will meet?" replied Peters. "Fiedler, who works for Munt," said Leamas. Leamas thought back to what he had learned about Fiedler. Leamas remembered that Fiedler had lived in Canada during the war, so he spoke good English. The photographs had shown a thin young man with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. He was a man who worked alone and whose colleagues did not like or trust him. He remembered what Control had said. Fiedler hates Munt, and he is as clever as Munt. He'd like to get rid of Munt, so he is the person who is most useful to us. You will make him believe that Munt is a double agent working for us, but you mustn't make it obvious." Finally, the car arrived at a farmhouse and stopped outside it. By now it was night, and in the light of the moon, Leamas saw two men get out of the small car, which had also stopped. He could also see a thin man sitting in the back of it. Peters took Leamas into the old farmhouse, which smelled like a place where nobody lived. He and Leamas sat down in a room with old, dark-coloured furniture and photos of Soviet leaders on the walls. After a few silent minutes, the door opened and a short, thin man came in, carrying a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He was wearing a dark blue suit that looked too big for him. "Hello," he said to Leamas. "I'm Fiedler. I'm glad to see you. You've reached the end of your journey." "What do you mean?" asked Leamas quickly. "I mean that you're not going any further east. Sorry." Leamas remembered something Control had said. "Make them dislike you, and then they will believe what you tell them more." So he pretended to be very angry. Leamas turned to Peters. "Is this true?" he shouted angrily.
"Tell me!"
Peters nodded.
"Yes, we, the Soviet Secret Service, agreed to help our friends in the East German Secret Service and bring you here."
Leamas shouted at Fiedler,
"You knew I wouldn't defect to a little unimportant place like the GDR. That's why you sent a Russian."
"We had help from the Russians to take you to Holland," said Fiedler. "In fact, we didn't want to bring you to East Germany. But we didn't know that your colleagues in Britain would find out about your defection so quickly. We had to do it because there are still things that you haven't told us."
Then Fiedler said something in Russian to Peters, who nodded and stood up.
"Goodbye,"
Peters said to Leamas. Leamas did not answer.